when I enlisted in the Marine Corps, I had these great grades, like, you can do whatever you want. I'm like, I think I want to do the infantry. Are you sure, son? I'm like, yeah, I want to do infantry. I want to travel to exotic lands, meet interesting people, and shoot them.
There's a movie called Soylent Green.
Oh, yeah, Charlton Heston.
That was the first movie my mom ever took me to in a movie theater when I was 6. Don't ask me why she took me to see that. She's like, well, I thought it was a movie about ecology. So let's now go back to the books. I want to get to the books of why was it post-apocalyptic? What about that drew you? Because when you write a book, it's like giving birth to a child. What gravitated you to spend that amount of time? And it's a series.
There's 2 reasons I decided to do it. One, when I read the children's book, I was like, okay, there's idea, effort, consistency, discipline, effort, product, now it's manifested, it's real in my hands. Like, okay, I can do this. But I'd also been reading a lot at that time, and I was looking for something and I was like, well, if I can't find what I'm looking for, why don't I just write it? And that was the genesis behind that first book.
G. Michael Hopf, we're having a good time in the pregame already. We're talking about some stuff, but we have a lot of parallels. We're going to talk about your books. We're going to talk about post-apocalyptic stories. My first movie in a movie theater. Look behind me. You can see there's a movie called Soylent Green.
Oh, yeah, Charlton Heston, the classic.
Yeah, that was the first movie my mom ever took me to in a movie theater when I was 6. Don't ask me why she took me to see that. She's like, well, I thought it was a movie about ecology. It's not the movie you want to see the first time in a movie theater at 6. Then if you look, also notice I got the Baker shot detonation, the underwater in the South Bikini Atoll Islands, probably because of the influence of Soylent Green. I've always had a fascination with man's inhumanity, with the nuclear weapons. And if you look on the upper right, you'll see this guy with a cigarette, that crusty bastard. He was my stepdad. He was a sergeant in the Marine Corps. So we have a lot of fun things, a lot of parallels. I'm really excited to get into your story. When I read your bio, I was like, oh, there's so many fun things to talk about. I love the Marines. I love what you're writing. So I want to go back, though. I want to go back to the origin of your story. Today you're talking to me from San Diego, but where are you from? Where'd you grow up? Did you always want to be in the military? And let's talk about your upbringing a little bit.
Yeah, I'm originally from Maryland, that little state that's kind of sandwiched in between Pennsylvania and Virginia. And I grew up there. Grew up on a farm, kind of a non-working farm at the time. It was a tobacco farm at one time, but they had stopped producing for tobacco before I was even born. But the remnants of it were there in the barns, old dry tobacco sitting on the tobacco sticks and things like that. Great childhood. Grew up on a farm. Parents were together. My parents were amazing. My dad, unfortunately, has passed away, but he was a good man. So I had really good upbringing, living on the farm with my brothers and sisters. And we had almost for lack of a better word, it's like a commune in some ways, because we had our house, and then we would see across the field was where my grandparents lived, and then the next field over is where my uncles lived. And so my grandfather moved down from Baltimore in the 1930s and bought 100 and some, I think it was 190 acres at the time. And then he loved family. He wanted family around. So whenever one of the kids, got married, he offered them a plot, 6, 9, 10 acres. He goes, it's yours. Just take it. If you want, you can build a house there. It's yours. And so my parents took him up on it, and they built a house there. And I lived there my whole life until I went into the Marine Corps. And then I had always wanted to go in the Marine Corps, when I was first starting out and in high school. And then eventually I was I just kind of I did really good in school, but I just wanted to get out and see the world. And I thought I had this, I kind of romanticized military and war movies and shit like that. And then, of course, movies are not like real life, of course. So I looked at the Marine Corps. My dad had been a Marine for a short period of time, just post Korea War. And I was like, at first I mentioned, I was like, I'm going to go in the Navy. He's like, no, you're not. I was like, okay, fine. I'll go in the Marine Corps. And then, so when I enlisted in the Marine Corps, I had these great grades, like, you can do whatever you want. I'm like, I think I want to do the infantry. Are you sure, son? I'm like, yeah, I want to do infantry. I want to travel to exotic lands, meet interesting people, and shoot them, And I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to be part of an expeditionary force. And I signed 6 years Like I was so stupid. I initially signed 6 years, which kind of instead of four, and I was against my dad's kind of wisdom. And so I signed six. It guaranteed me my location and my MOS, which is already kind of guaranteed anyway. Everyone gets you either end up as a cook, a truck driver, or infantry if you don't pick anything. Those are the three MOSs you end up as.
Yeah.
So I did infantry. Went in, was an anti-tank gunner for a few years. Uh, Deployed three times. Ended up with I was with First Tank Battalion and ended up with like a line unit, what they call an infantry line unit, which was First Battalion Weapons Company, First Battalion, First Marines, and then I got out as a sergeant.
Nice. Well, that's awesome. So while you were in the Marines, did you know that you wanted to write, or you saying, or was that an afterthought afterwards?
I kind of dabbled with it. I've always been a big reader, even all through high school. I just loved to read. I kind of dabbled even in high school with some creative writing and messed around with it. I did the same thing. I kept a journal when I was overseas and deployments and things like that. I didn't do much with it. Again, just I was ravenous about books. I was just reading and reading and reading and reading and reading. The writing thing didn't come until like later. I had after I was married and had my daughters, and I was reading them books, and it was kind of my thing to like jump in bed and read them books at night and put them to bed kind of thing. And I had this idea to come up with like a children's book. It's like, how hard can this be? Like the stories are pretty simple. So I ended up writing and having it produced. I had it illustrated and things like that, like a children's illustrated book. It was kind of like a legacy thing for the girls. And then once I had that completed in my hand, I was like, oh shit. So why don't I do a novel? And so I didn't mention it to my wife until after I'd already written a few chapters because she knows who I am. She's like, I always have ideas. He's like, okay, here's another idea.
Yeah.
So I didn't want her to like, I was serious about it. And I knew her well enough that if I was going to have to convince her that I was going to take time away from everything else and family and whatnot to write a novel, that I'd have to show that I was actually serious. And it wasn't just something I was just bringing up. So I mentioned it to her and she had their initial reaction. I roll like, okay, it's another one of your ideas. I was like, hold on, but I actually had a few chapters. And she read them and she's like, this is pretty good. I really like this. And so I just set about to writing at night until I finished that first novel.
Well,
Took about a year and a half.
let's go back a little bit to, your time, because it's a good chunk, 6 years. And also gives me an idea of you as a writer. The Marine Corps can be volatile. Where did you run into, were some, take us through some of like, the milestones or highlights, or some lowlights of, your time, while you were in service?
Like I said, I did three deployments. One was combat deployment. And, all in all, I really just have to be very candid. I look back and how I look at it kind of sums up how I even just look at everything in life, even when stuff is not the most optimal. Um, we're very tough. I'm facing lots of adversity. I just look at those as opportunities, and I look at those as I'm glad I went through those experiences because it honed who I am today, and I wouldn't take any of that shit back. And even when I have always remembered now. I always think of the words of I think King Solomon, who's in the Bible, and he's like the richest guy in the world at one time. And he had this gold ring, and he had engraved on it was "This too shall pass." So even when the richest guy in the world's in history would also have problems, have adversity, have issues, yet he needed some kind of motivation, something to bring him out of it, to know that whatever that moment is, he can get past that. That it's just a time and place. And if you just persevere, you'll get on the other side of that. And so I always look at all of those incidences that I went through and the guys I served with and all this stuff that happened as a very positive experience. I usually don't like to get too deep in the weeds on that stuff, but it's all in all, it was very good. And when people they'll thank me for my service, and to be very candid, and I'm very honest, I'm not just blowing smoke. I actually am very thankful to my country that I got to serve because I thought it was an incredible experience. I grew up a lot. I saw a lot of things. And it was just an incredible experience for a young man to go do those things and really see the world. You get this whole perspective, you're growing up like I did, really good. And then being in the ranks with guys that didn't have good families, that knew racism. Like one of my guys that was in my squad he's a young black man that was from South Carolina, and we were talking before, and just all the horrible stuff that he was subjected to, and racism in the South and things like that. That
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know anything about that stuff, but he like a single family, single mom taking care of him. And it's just like, so I really got to meet people and spend lots of time with them because that's what you do. You have nowhere else to go, so sit there and talk. And just, I really got like a really good, perspective. I don't want to overuse that word on just people and that, but yet while we have all these vastly different upbringings and where we come from and even our skin color, we're all still the same people. We want the same things inside. We all want to have a happy life. And if we're married, we want to have, if we have children, we want them to be happy. We want to thrive. We're all the same, yet we come from different places. So anyway, I have nothing but really, I try to just say, reframe everything as very positive experiences from the military, even though some of it wasn't pleasant.
Right. Well, I was just talking to somebody earlier today about, the algorithm of that we're always searching for on the show is like, there's a commonality between successful people. And I've come to the conclusion after all these episodes is that the lifeblood of the engine is gratitude. So whenever something happens to you, the internal dialogue is not a disempowering question, but always like an empowering question of what can I learn for this? What's interesting about this? And it's like these empowering questions dominate a successful person whenever adversity strikes, and then helps them move forward. And also it's like a race car driver, when they get towards the wall, they say, look towards the track, and then your hands will follow. And that seems to be, the case with you. So let's now go back to the books. I want to get to the books, and there'll be other stuff, but I want to skim over some stuff. I want to get to these books of why was it post-apocalyptic? What about that drew you? Because when you write a book, it's like giving birth to a child. I know me, writing a screenplay takes me about 9 months. From the very beginning to the very end, rewriting and everything. It's a 9-month process, like delivering a baby. So like why would you, what gravitated you to spend that amount of time? And it's a series. So like, let's talk about that.
Yeah, well, again, the idea was born. There's two reasons I decided to do it. One, when I created the children's book, I was like, okay, there's idea, effort, consistency, discipline, effort, product, now it's manifested, it's real in my hands. Like, okay, I can do this. But I'd also been reading a lot at that time, and I was looking for something and I was like, well, if I can't find what I'm looking for, why don't I just write it? And that was the genesis behind that first book. It's like I wanted these elements in this apocalyptic novel or series that I wasn't finding. And I was like, well, I'll just set out to write it. I was finding elements in different books. And I was like, well, I just put it all together. Because the story, if you look at the New World series, it's very complex. My publisher, Penguin, was like, this is really complicated plot. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of characters. It's all around the world. So you get all these different POVs happening. And I wanted the readers to understand that when the event occurs, you're getting a POV from a family in San Diego, and then another POV from a person that's in the military. You're getting to see what's happening in the military as everything's starting to kind of come apart. Then you're getting a POV from the government. So now as a reader, you're understanding what's happening in the halls of government during this event. So I really wanted to show that, but not just talk about it, but actually show it so the readers can experience it. Because I do the event is kind of like you're taken up, you're introduced to the characters like just a little bit before. Then it's like a ticking clock as the event occurs, and you're following along and reading as day by day by day goes, like each day. So you're seeing the cascading failures and the collapse kind of happening before your eyes as a reader. And it's an EMP. So I use the weapon of choice is a super EMP essentially, which is it's essentially a nuclear warhead that is optimized for gamma radiation, which really enhances the electromagnetic pulse. And I really wanted it because what I wanted to do is have really no electrical, no grid at all. I wanted everything to go down. I wanted it all to disappear. Essentially. So it's nothing's useful. Everything's broken. Everything's electronic is gone. And so essentially you're taking society and you're reverting everything back to the, 100 plus years ago, but in a place where no one has a skill set to survive in that.
Mm.
And I wanted to see then how people would react to it. Because going back to the Marine Corps, I really observed different people and their way of life and how people would react to certain situations when we were in one situation overseas, we can have one event and then multiple reactions to one event. Some people are freaking out. Some people are like going in. Some people are just freezing. It's like, what is that? It's like, what's happening there? I've just been fascinated by just the human response and the human condition to, cataclysm, and that's really what this is. It's kind of just following characters and how they're reacting to it as the days are ticking by and society is collapsing.
I concur. There's something about that. I likewise. One of the a mini series that was really impressionable to me was a series called The Day After in the early
Mm-hmm.
'80s. You're familiar with it, so it's
Very familiar. Yeah.
and you got you got they're sitting there. The news is playing tensions between Russia and the United States today, and it's like, oh look, things are happening, but kids are playing. Mom and dad are rushed to go to work. No one's paying attention, and this buildup, and then they're showing all kinds of and that was very impactful. During that time on ABC, they actually had politicians. When the series was over, they had a roundtable of how they thought that this might metastasize, so to speak, use that word, of like how would this come about and grow into a possible nuclear situation. And I think the psychological reactions, the dynamics of that are very interesting. EMP is really big lately. Guys like to talk about that in circles. Like I get together, guys. Everyone's like, you'll have dinner, getting ready to eat a steak, and everyone's like, EMP. I was like, well, I don't know. I think good old fashioned nuclear war is probably going to be the bomb that they're going to be able to get. So in your book, it's interesting. What prevents who starts an EMP? And let's talk about some of these scenarios. And
Well,
and
okay.
also why would you think like not a mixture of nuclear combat and EMP, or what is that? Let's talk about all this. When a writer thinks about because you're really specializing in reality too, from a perspective.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm going to give some spoilers away here. So there is a nuclear exchange that happens in the books as well.
Mm.
Because the group that is orchestrating this is again we're not introduced to who they are into the second book as far as who actually orchestrated it, because what it ends up being is a massively very sophisticated coordinated series of EMP attacks globally. So you have one that's detonated over North America, you have one that's detonated over Europe, you have one that's detonated over Asia, and then there's a failed and one over parts of no, South America is it's been a few years. South America is left alone.
Yeah.
And then there's a failed attempt in Australia. So Australia is essentially one of the last, is like the last, like first world kind of Western power that survives this very sophisticated coordinated attack.
Mm-hmm.
However, there are strategic nuclear strikes that are done on the capital cities of around the world, like Washington D.C. is, and then New York City is taken out. Mm-hmm. So essentially, you have like the political capital, and then you have like the financial capital. They're gone. And, but I end up having it's orchestrated by really just the head, he's like the heir to a massive drug cartel, because he has dreams of creating what I call the Pan-American Empire. And so in order for him to do it, he doesn't want to completely destroy the country. What he wants to do is just, as far as not have physical damage to it, but just decimate it. And then he can roll in and then start conquering with an army that he ends up acquiring he buys like military equipment and aid and things like that. I think I had him from Venezuela and Colombia and things like that.
What years does this take place?
This takes place in 2004, 2005.
So, but how would somebody, even a drug cartel, is this something that you believe would be possibly feasible with a couple, possibilities, or what do you what are your
Well,
thoughts on
I think it'd be very difficult. But like any type of a EMP attack is very difficult to pull off. It is again, like I use the word sophisticated. It's a very sophisticated attack in order to pull that off. I specifically, we do have mechanisms in place for defense. I wouldn't say we have like an Iron Dome like they have in Israel, but we have the ability to probably knock something out of the sky if it was just a singular attack. And how it's pulled off is that they launch these ballistic missiles from container ships. So they pull the container ships. So it's not like it's an ICBM that's traveling from, say, South America. It's traveling from, they pull it up into the Sea of Cortez and they pull it up as far as north as they can. So it doesn't have, it's a pretty quick flight from the back, from the deck of that container ship to, just above like Nebraska, 300 miles up. That's all it's got to go to get the effects that it needs. So it's a pretty quick flight path when you go from Sea of Cortez just south of Arizona and you direct it right over Kansas, Nebraska. It doesn't take very long to get there. And so I made it somewhat easy. I did kind of gloss over like how did he acquire the weapons? Of course, they kind of acquired them. I think it was from North Korea. Those sorts of things. I mean, you kind of have to suspend. I mean, you're into writing screenplays. You have to suspend some kind of disbelief. I mean, the ability for an independent actor like that to pull this off would be challenging because of our intel would be clued in on what's going on anyway. So if there was a complete and utter like intelligence failure, then yeah, you could probably have something pretty dynamic that happens. I mean, look at 9/11. Like that was a huge, massive intelligence failure that led to, I mean, whoever thought that was, and by the way, that was kind of a sophisticated attack, in some regards, right?
Yeah, the fact that it was just so like a brazen left field kind of situation, and you're like, no one ever thought. Now it's Monday morning quarterbacking. Well, that seems obvious, but like, no one really thought that was like be a thing. Also, for people listening, it's like you're a writer, so you're thinking protagonist, antagonist, structure, because if it was just like a rogue, like let's say a Russia or a Middle Eastern country, or like Iran, when they finally get, it's really, really hard to really have, I guess you could have the antagonist, but it's hard to really build a story structure around a world war, as opposed to maybe somebody with the interest of like Hans Gruber.
Yeah, because nobody knows who actually orchestrated it. You're left with, in Washington D.C. is gone. How I have in the book, you have the Speaker of the House, who happened to just by chance not be in D.C. at the time. He's in Oklahoma City because his son is involved in a car accident. She happens not to be there, and when D.C. is hit and everyone's killed, like the head of government is completely decapitated. And so he essentially ascends to the presidency and then is ushered off the Cheyenne Mountain, right? To go bunker down, because by the way, that's part of like the whole kind of government response to an EMP attack would be to bunker down the government. It's called COG, continuity of government. Everyone just bunkers down. And because they know just how like, if something like that were to go down, and there was a couple of reports done on it. I think the first one came out in 2003. It's just called the EMP report. And they kind of detail kind of the chances, the likelihood. It was done during, George W. Bush's administration. And then it was amended later on in his administration. But they go in there, and part of that whole report details what the government should do. And the government's all about protecting itself. And there's not much that they can actually do for the nation. If it's something that is continental wide, grid down, that's going to extend past months, it's such a massive problem that they just will retreat because they can't do anything.
Right.
And they just leave us there to fend for ourselves.
Right. And some of these, there are some, you get together with the guys, I don't know. So I'm asking, a lot of Faraday type of structures, Faraday packs. How effective are those? Let's talk about that real life scenario so we can get behind the story a little bit.
Yeah, they're very effective because the whole thing you're trying to do is make sure that the electromagnetic pulse doesn't fry your equipment. Yeah, so I mean, you put it in a Faraday cage, you are insulating it because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to insulate anything that has a circuit board from getting fried. That's the goal. And then you can look at, but by the way, there are how do I try to explain this simply? I used the Super EMP too because I wanted, like I mentioned earlier, I wanted it to be completely effective on pretty much everything. But like if again that is a theoretical weapon, the Super EMP. I
Mhm.
think that they exist. I'm sure that they do. But if you just used a conventional nuclear warhead and detonated it, kind of and like low Earth orbit, you'll get that effect, right? You'll get just a standard EMP, but that's not necessarily universal. Like it's not as if you're going to have every single say you have a modern like Cadillac in Southern California gets fried and you're going to have that same effect across the continent. It's not going to be that way. It's going to be just depending on how the atmosphere is at that moment and what's going on there, how it impacts the ground. It's not like it's some kind of like circular thing. It just funnels down to the ground. So there will be areas that will be less affected than others. Like if you have your car parked in like a parking garage, like subterranean, the concrete acts as an insulator, and you probably have, yeah, your car will probably start. I mean, so it won't like necessarily be 100% universal destruction of everything, but it'll be enough. Specifically, the grid will collapse.
Right.
It's gone. And you get rid of the grid, you pretty much, your car's useless anyway,
Right.
because how are you going to get gasoline? How are you going to charge your car unless you can have now there's ways of doing that. You have solar panels and then you have the batteries and that you can, so there are means of getting around being off grid. But I mean, if you just remove the grid and even if people had cars that operated, you've got a massive shit show, man.
Right.
You've got collapse going on there too, because you
Right.
can't get trucks to supermarkets. You can't get
Right.
the whole thing. Like I mentioned, it's cascading failures. I mean, just like if you go any city, you got municipal water tanks. Well, those are all fed. They're gravity feeds down the neighborhoods. You set up on hills, but they got to get the water into there, and they're delivered by pumps.
Right.
And you have to have power in order to get the pump to work. And so
Right.
eventually, all your gigantic, 100,000 gallon municipal water tanks dry up. And then now you've got whole cities, whole towns, subdivisions out of water.
Right. So, how feasible, like, I mean, you have a very interesting perspective because when a writer writes something, he's analyzing, he's trying to, connect the dots as closely as he can to reality, most of the time. And you have an interesting perspective from a outside of the story. What do you think a scenario will be, when technology catches up with bad actors? It almost seems like an inevitable, not to be a nihilist, but I've always had that conversation. It's like, I, you know, man will compromise itself, and then technology catches up with ability. So what's to stop, and what's a scenario? Do you think that Iran, when they get long range capabilities, they might be the first one to really do something that's severely damaging to the planet? Or what if you had to, be an advisor and say, hey, look, this is what I think that we need to be cognitive of because this could be a real danger. What do you think the possible real dangers are as far as a scenario like this?
Of an EMP attack.
No, no, just a global attack in general. What's the most what could be probable? From you being an insider, and also if you were a Martian coming from an outer space, but saying, look, what's the probability of your planet is extincting each other, in this way? What do you think the scenario might be?
I'm not the biggest believer anymore in like nation states fighting nation states on such grand global scales. I think not this again. There's always probabilities that can happen. Someone asked me the other day, like, what
If
are
it
your
happens,
odds
don't
of
worry, we're not going to come after you.
what are the odds of like China wanting to take Taiwan? And the reality is, I don't see how they win that situation. Period. Like, what's the up game for that? Like, it's like they need Taiwan for what reason? Because it's that province that got away. That's the only reason that like Xi or any other kind of premier that's in China would want to take his nation to war, and then clearly the entire world will isolate them. And like maybe there'll probably be a coalition that's gathered to stop them or repel them. Like I don't see the end game. The way I know globalism appears like it's on the decline, but we're still probably decades out from if we ever get to like, I just don't see us going back. Every nation's like some isolationist nation. There's always going to be some form of some form of globalism and trade and interacting and things like that. I just don't see the upside for like nation states to do certain things specifically to provoke. Like then you have Russia that invades Ukraine, right? And then that kind of throws up my whole argument. Like, but when you look at that, it's not as if he attacked a NATO member. I just don't ever see Putin ever pulling that shit off. He looked at Ukraine as easy pickings. He already had an agenda to kind of take those eastern provinces. He's got his motives. I'm not justifying anything. I'm just, when you look at it just objectively on why these pieces are moving around on the risk board, right?
Yes.
He had his motivations for those eastern provinces, and because otherwise he probably could have rolled through the entire country. I don't see what was really going to stop him. But I just don't really. I think you can see little regional things. I just don't know if we'll see some major, for a long time. I think we'll just see very low scale proxy wars like we've seen for, I don't know. I don't foresee it. But then again, you get someone light up a nuke tomorrow and like, oh shit, I was wrong.
Right. Kind of like a larger scale 9/11.
Yeah, because you'd have to just be an individual or a leader that just has no heart. Like, because that the end result of that is mutually assured destruction.
Right.
Like you just don't win. It's like a Pyrrhic victory. Say you do manage to destroy more other cities than yours, but you don't win anything. You're so decimated, there is no victory.
Right.
I just don't know if, but that's not to say that if we remove the United States as some kind of the watchdog or the police dog in the world, that you wouldn't have some people in the absence of power there. When you introduce like a vacuum, that somebody may not try to fill that space. Maybe that's not a good character down the road, decades from now, possibly.
Right.
Again, just with the weaponry we have, it's like, it doesn't take much to like, you just don't win. Right. You end up with nothing.
Right. We learned that in another movie called War Games in the late 80s.
Yeah.
There's no point.
There's no point unless you're just suicidal.
Right.
That would be it. You're just a suicidal maniac and you don't care. Then there's actually no negotiating with that person anyway. It's over. If they're that person, the best thing to do is just kill them.
Right.
Take them out.
Right. And hopefully we'll always be ahead of that curve,
hopefully we'll have the intel to know that. Yeah.
Right. So where are you at today with your books, everything you're doing in life, in your career? What's happening with you topically?
I wrote my 40th novel back I released it 40th, in January.
40? Did you just say 40? Yeah. That's a staggering. It's a real
I went from like writing novels in 18 months to putting them out in 3. I'm pretty prolific. Yeah. But I kind of a little burned out here and there though from doing it. So like when I go back and I look at, it took me 18 months to write The End. That's the first novel. And I got an agent, and then I fired the agent. Every author's like, what are you doing? It's hard to just get an agent. I was like, they're a pain in my ass. And so I fired the agent, and then I just hit self-publish on Amazon.
Nice.
And then shit, man, 10 days later, it just took off.
Wow.
Just went,
it
wouldn't stop.
What's the series? What's your big series? What's it called?
It's called the New World Series.
New World Series. And how many books is the series?
So there's 7 main books in that's part of the canon of books. And then I have spinoffs. I took some characters that I created. There's one that follows this one woman named Lexi, and she's got her own series. It's called Nemesis. And then I've done some other like little spinoff stuff. I've done some novellas that are kind of attached to the series, kind of exploring little other parts of the country that aren't really mentioned. Because it's pretty complicated. Like when Penguin picked it up, because it was doing so well that Penguin called and they offered a nice attractive deal for it. So it's like, why not? Huge mistake, by the way.
Yeah. Well, hey, but you know, the goal, I always like to say, what's your long-term play? But I think I already know yours, but let me ask, what's your long-term play?
Overall, for like writing in general,
Yes.
yeah, I'm never going to retire writing. I'll always write. I just love it. There's no reason. I should probably die in front of my computer, writing a story. I enjoy world building. I really do. It's just so much fun. I could sit and talk with other creators, other authors, screenwriters, and just world build. And I think I find so much joy in that to sit around and just create.
Right.
So I'll continue to do that. But I also enjoy helping others achieve the dream of finding some kind of whatever the hell they define success by getting their books out. I was helped out when I self-published the first book. I was just knocking on doors. There was a guy I was competing with in the ranks, Doug Richards, New York Times bestseller. I just reached out to him. And I was like, "Hey, you got any advice for me? I'm the new author. I'm like, if you know, I'm like number 2. I'm like right behind you." And he was like, "Yeah, let's meet for lunch." He happened to live in San Diego. I was like, he took me to
Wow.
lunch. He like, "This is what you should do. If they offer you a contract, blah, blah, blah." He offered so much valuable kind of insight. And all I did was just knock on doors. And he answered and he offered advice. And I took him up on it. We're still good friends. And so I left that meeting with him, that lunch. I was like, I'm going to do the same thing. Like, I'm going to keep paying that forward. He helped me. He gave me like very sound advice. So I've done that since. So over the past 13 years, if someone wants advice, if a quick email, I respond to everybody, help them out. And then so then that turned into like coaching people, like from a professional standpoint, and then creating publishing companies and things like that. So other authors can fulfill their dream of having a published book.
That's great. Uh, Let me ask you a question. I don't know if anybody's ever asked you this. Are you ready for an EMP?
Yeah, I'm pretty prepared. Yeah.
Look at you. All right. Now, what
Yeah.
does that entail?
No, I come down, I look at it this way. I have these, what I call like the 4 pillars of survival that I think are pretty sound.
Yeah.
And you've got resources. You got to have resources. And by the way, all these things are just like an insurance policy they are.
Right.
When I tell people that I'm prepared, they act like, wait a minute, you have teeth? You prepared? They act like some kind of a redneck kind of white trash thing, like you're
Right.
a prepper. And I'm like,
right.
Yeah, I actually would consider. I mean, if you look at the skill sets I've developed over the years, the resources that I have, it's a mindset thing. Yeah, I'm prepared. Like when COVID happened, we just closed the door and just had a nice time. I wasn't worried about anything. And my wife was so happy about that. Like all the years, like, I'm so glad all the years you've collected all this stuff.
Yeah.
Suddenly, like, you don't think about it until the shit happens. And then because you're unsure. Anyway, so I kind of created this thing called the 4 pillars of survival. It deals with resources because you clearly need resources. Mm-hmm. That's water and food. Those are the main things that you need to have. Access to water or storage of water. Access to food. They say a couple of weeks of food. I think you should have a year to 18 months of food. Why not?
Right.
It doesn't cost that much really in the long and really doesn't cost that much to buy those things or just buy, canned food and just have it sit there and cycle through it in your pantry over time.
Right.
And then you got to have other resources are just sort of like basic survival gear, camping gear if you have to be outside, inclement weather, things like that. Firearms, firearms are a tool. You got to have firearms because if you have stuff, people might want to get it. So you need to protect it. And so a firearm is nothing but a tool and all the other kind of weaponry that might fall in line with that. And then I look at skill sets. Skill sets part of it is a pillar by itself. You have to have a skill set, a specific skill set. It's good to be kind of a jack of all trades and you kind of know a lot of shit, but it's nice to have some very honed in expertise on something, whether that's like whether it's you're a dentist or some medical stuff or you know how to dig wells, whatever those kinds of things are, how to build your, just kind of trades kind of skills, which I think are very valuable, or just gardening, like horticulture, hunting, how to dress game after you get it. Those are things that I think a lot of people have lost those skill sets today.
Right.
And this, by the way, would cause the panic in modern societies because they know they don't have the skill sets to survive. That's what causes panic. Panic happens when people realize, oh shit, I'm not ready for this.
Right.
That is what happens. And then the other two is mindset. You got to have a mindset. Like when something happens, you just, like Jocko says, you're good, and you just figure it out. You're there. You don't emotionally overreact. You're very calm and collected, and you just address whatever the situation is. So the mindset's there, and you're prepared to do what's necessary to protect yourself and your family. It's a mindset thing. So, and I look at it as just like speaking as a man, and I have, my wife and my daughters. It's my role to protect them, and so it's drilled into my mindset. That's what I'm here to do. Not that they couldn't if they needed to. They have their own training, but that's kind of I look as I'm like the leader in that space. And then fitness. Fitness is the fourth pillar in that. I think having conditioning. Not that you have to. I'm not saying you have to have a washboard stomach, but you just have to be able to like have the physicality to deal in a situation. Like even today, there's so many people like something happens and they can't walk a mile. Like, right. That's horrible. That's not good. You got to have the means. You can say you want to protect your family, but then you don't have the physicality to do it. Then you're useless. You really are. Right. And so having the fitness level means conditioning. So you can put a pack on. You can roll around on the ground with somebody if you have to. Whatever that is, if it's staying up for 12 hours, doing work on things, whatever that is, physicality, fitness is very key. So those are the four pillars that I always recommend to people.
Those are wonderful pillars. That's a great set. Last question. I mean, you want to have these books turned into a series on Netflix, a Hulu, a movie. I mean, how are we going to get that done?
I would absolutely love that. I mean, that is always an author's dream, right? To see their books adapted to the screen, and now you're watching what you've created.
I would love to see this, and I think a lot of guys, I think it's masculine driven to survive. So I think it really touches along a lot of the human needs that, that we all have. So I really think it's, you see that rentable or whatever, you're like, well, let's watch that. So, I mean, what are we doing to try to get that accomplished?
So I've had options before. I'm forgetting his name. I think his last name, Richard. Anyway, he was a producer for Backdraft and some others. He had me come to Santa Monica. I met with him. We sat down for a long time, went round and round, and then just nothing came of it. He optioned it for a year, and then it just went away. Poof. And he ended up finding out about the books because his son was all into them. His teenage son, 18, was like, "Oh, Dad, you got to check these books are amazing." Yeah. And that's what's so cool, man. Like, you would think like the demographic would just be like guys our age, 30 something, 40, 50-year-old. There was a high school in North Carolina that the high school class voted my book like back. This was in when was this? 2013, 2014, like the best book for that school year that year. Wow. The end. They loved it. There's some high school, somewhere outside of Fayetteville or whatever, was like, this is a favorite book. So there's a lot of teenagers and, people in that age that really gravitated to it. They just love the action. And there's lots of action. Like, I think I've got it paced really well. You just bam, 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 bam. You're turning the page. It's just got a nice flow to it. So it really connects, I think, but you'd be surprised how many women like it too.
Sure. Because
I mean, it's not the majority of the demo, but there's a sizable population of women that actually really got into it in the series.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that they would want to. It depends also, your B story, the enemy ally, the all the characters. I'm sure there's like you have to appeal to that specifically, but also I think it's a universal subject, survival and it's also rarefied. Subject matter. It's not a lot, the Book of Eli, kind of things like that, there's not a lot of that. And it's and as the more unpredictable our future becomes, and we deal with like the past, 20 years, 25 years, things become very unpredictable. So that's something that you want to watch to see how would that pan out. My curiosity is piqued by that type of interest. And that's why I think people would see it.
Yeah, that's what like I've really wanted to do in the books is, and by the way, this is why I think fiction is a better way of driving a message to audience than say a nonfiction type of book. I was having a discussion with someone about that the other day because they were mentioning Lee Child has that same view as I do. You know, Lee Child, Jack Reacher.
Yeah.
And Lee has that same thing. Lee's of the opinions like, look, fiction is the way. If you've got something you're trying to get through to people, you put it in fiction because you as a reader or a viewer, even you're watching, you connect with that character. You're starting to look through the eyes of that character. And now there's situations that are happening. How would I deal with that? How would I deal with that? Right. And I do that in the book with, a lot of people are trying to connect with Gordon Van Zant, who's the main character. He's the protagonist, and he's not a perfect guy. He makes mistakes. But in some situations, I put him in like he goes left, someone dies. He goes right, someone dies. But he's got to make a decision. And they're very tough decisions to make. And so and I leave things, it almost seems like, I think it was like pre-Game of Thrones HBO stuff, but it was like there's characters that are just get knocked off, that their main character is part of the core of people.
Right.
And it's because I want it to be realistic, because that's going to happen in a survival situation. Someone you think is your buddy, the next thing he's dead. Like, holy shit, that was not supposed to happen. I did not see that happening.
Right.
And I do that too as a device to make the reader very anxious. Like they have no idea. I actually wanted them to get invested sometimes. And then that's taken from them because that is how that could be for them. Right. So like, now what am I going to do? This guy was supposed to protect me and he's gone. And it leaves readers, and I've been hit with some people pissed off about it. And like, why did you do that? And I see it, I've worked. You're really angry about it. You're upset.
Right.
And that's what I was trying to do. I was wanting to get an emotional response out of you.
Right. Don't let producers ever talk you out of that, because it works for Taylor Sheridan a lot. A lot, especially in 1923. Great stuff. This is really great. Tell everybody how they can find out more about you.
Yeah, best place to go is to my website, gmichaelhopf.com. I don't really have social media anymore. I kind of got rid of that a while ago. Too much distractions. But if anyone wants to email me, it's Jeff, GEOFF @gmichaelhopf.com. Ask me anything you want.
G. Michael Hopf, great stuff. Thank you so much for sharing. Looking forward to seeing more.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us. Gear up for your next adventure and head over to bolator.com to check out the amazing Bolo Pack and their other innovative outdoor gear. Catch you next time.